Texas lawmakers are still working to find more ways to keep Texans safe after last July's severe floods. And those floods killed more than 130 people. And while lawmakers say they've made some headway, new reporting from the Texas Tribune and ProPublica reveals dozens of flood protection bills were rejected over nearly 6 decades. Lexi Churchill is one of the reporters behind this investigation. She's joining us now with more. Lexi, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
This was quite the undertaking for you all to go through legislation dating back 60 years to look at what passed and didn't pass. First, tell me, what exactly were you looking for? How do you qualify something as, flood bills?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the bills we were focused on were those that could control where or how buildings were constructed in flood-prone areas. There's been a lot of talk of warning sirens and other alerts that could have helped, but we wanted to answer the question, why were so many people in these flood-prone areas to begin with, across RV parks, youth camps, their homes? Why were they allowed to build there in the first place? And the answer we came to ended up being within these dozens of bills you referenced. Part of it is because Texas has rejected so many bills that could have allowed local leaders to control development in a way that was further back from floods or higher up. And we actually found a few bills from decades ago that we ran by flood experts, and they said they actually could have saved lives had they passed many years ago.
So we should point out, right, the Army Corps of Engineers generally decides what's a floodplain, what's not a floodplain, and sometimes that can change, right? Those maps we know change year over year. There are parts of Austin that maybe weren't in a floodplain, were in the county, then get annexed. But your point is, at the times when some of these bills were filed, it was known that this was floodplain, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So what we're talking about with those consequential bills I mentioned is there were 2 bills in 1973 that could have prevented, for the decades after that, any development in that worst part of the floodplain called the floodway. That's the area people expect to flood. It's right up against those rivers and bodies of water. There's another bill that was very similar to the youth camp bill that ended up passing after these last year's floods. So that would have prevented youth camps from operating within the 100-year floodplain. And like you said, sometimes the maps may have identified them in the 100-year floodplain. Sometimes they may not have. It changes. But regardless, these bills would have pointed to the maps you're talking about that if FEMA or the Army Corps had identified them in the floodplain, they would not have been allowed to be there.
Now, Lexi, obviously you were not covering the session in the 1970s, so this question is a little harder to answer. But talk to us about why some of this legislation failed. Why didn't it make it across the finish line?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, I wasn't there. And not all of these bills actually got a hearing. Some of the hearings don't exist. It was before they recorded the audio. But from what we have reviewed of the audio and the hearings back then, as well as, bills leading up to today, there's this essence that, Texas wants to protect people's property rights. And these types of regulations that tell a property owner you have to build higher or further back, or you can't build this type of structure there at all, is often seen as an infringement of property rights, and that the government is sort of taking your land or taking your ability to control those property rights. Often a fear as well that if you're identified in a flood-prone area with these maps, that's going to, affect your property value as well. So those are the underlying arguments we consistently saw against some of these bills.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. Lexi, if, moving forward though, right, because there's clearly been a departure from some of this when we're looking at the current legislation. Lawmakers are already making rules about summer camps. Are you anticipating to see more about properties and other types of development being built in floodplain?
I think it'll be really telling if there is, as you said, lawmakers have really only focused on the youth camps at this point, and rightfully so with what happened. But, even with RV parks, we found at least 48 of the 137 people who died were at RV parks. And lawmakers went so far as to, require better evacuation plans and other safety measures, but they still didn't pass the same type of ban for the youth camps that they did not allowing them to be there in the first place. So I'll be on the lookout. I think if there is wider legislation passed for RV parks or homes themselves, I think that will be very telling.
Yeah, and whether or not it gets to the governor's desk, you know, like you said, getting it filed, that's a little bit easier. Getting it across the finish line, way harder. Lexi Churchill, she's a reporter with the Texas Tribune and ProPublica. We thank you again for your time.